Hello, Ohio chapter of the AAP and the residents therein. My name is Chip Hart, and I'm here to give you a 45 to 60-minute class that those of us out in the industry who help support you wish all residents would take. I'm going to cover all of the things, or many of the things rather, that you need to think about once you're out of residency in terms of having a job and having a career, which are elements of your residency training that are usually not discussed properly. Just a really quick background. As I mentioned, my name is Chip Hart, and for the last almost 35 years, I have worked as effectively a pediatric practice management consultant. I help practices get started. I help practices once they're started get better. I help practices once they're better stay viable. That means everything from helping them set prices to negotiate with insurance companies, to find buildings, to open practices, to figure out how to pay themselves, figure out when they need to close, when they can open. That's my job. I work only with independent pediatricians as a rule. And I've spent a lot of time thinking and working with people just like you, but just a few years later in their careers. And when in that process, or as a result of doing that, we find over and over and over again that there are things that residents don't understand. And it's not your fault. This is all you've had years of intense training, because it's really important that you do understand the medicine, but you understand often only the medicine. And I'm here to give you just a little bit of an idea of what to expect next. One thing I should point out, very, very few residency programs are willing to actually talk about things like practice management, or even opening a practice, or working for yourself, or being independent. And that's because residencies, as a rule, create employees. They're not in the business to help physicians operate independently. And in fact, on a few occasions when I've given this talk, I've had residency programs ask me to remove the content about being an independent practice, which I'm unwilling to do. One thing you need to hear from me is that I've worked with dozens and dozens, maybe even 100 practices start up in just the last 5 years. And there are other people in our business who do this. And I want to be clear, I'm not advocating necessarily for that at all. That's not the best path for everyone. But I want to give you a full understanding of what's available to you once you are out of residency, because not everyone understands this. And many of the people who do try to enter independent practice do so a little bit behind the curve of understanding of what they need to do in order to be successful there. So I'm here to talk about that. Now, a couple things. Even though what I said was maybe already a little challenging for some of you, we're not going to be able to, in 45 or 60 minutes, actually dig as deeply as we need to into these subjects. My goal is to skim the surface, but get as many skips out of that stone as I can, to try to highlight things that I want to put on your radar. You've already proven, given where you are in your career, you've already proven that you're a hard worker, that you can consume a lot of knowledge, and you know how to study, you know how to think and learn. And I'm going to give you some content that hasn't been shared with you before. I promise. A lot of it actually is from the AAP itself. That's the coincidence here, that the AAP has a lot of really great content available for you. I'm going to highlight some of it, but I've also got some non-AAP content, and I'm going to do my best to put it in as practical framework as possible. At the end, of course, when I give this class, I usually do it in person, and what I find is, I stop in at some, like, doing at a residency program. They're at their lunch, and I come in, and everyone's just eating lunch and not paying attention. About 10 minutes into it, especially when I start talking about money, everyone wakes up and everyone starts taking notes. And often there are a lot of questions people have, but they don't necessarily want to ask them in front of everyone. This is unlike a lot of other presentations I give, where it's usually a free-for-all. But here, a lot of residents are nervous about showing what they don't know and talking about their futures, and they'd rather just do it one-on-one. So you're perfectly welcome to email me. I'll answer any of your emails. I'm glad to help. And my email address was there at the beginning, but it's chip@pcc.com. So I don't want you to worry while you're watching this. I just want you to let it wash over you a little bit, and and maybe absorb some of it, and also come back here for the references that you need. All right, let's start at the beginning. This is one of the things that that triggered me to ask to give this presentation. I was working with a couple different practices one time, literally on the same day. It was one really large practice in the middle of the country, incredibly busy. Let's say 12 doctors, thousands and thousands of visits a year, very successful. But occasionally struggling with elements of running the business because this was all new to them. I also was working with another practice, a smaller practice on the Southern Coast, also very successful, owned and run by a physician straight out of residency. And these practices had so much in common, but also had different perspectives on this question here when I asked them, because if I'm working with them, I was doing some consulting, and I realized that so much of what I share with people is really basic and fundamental business knowledge. And here I'm speaking to these very educated, very bright doctors, and I'm always like, you don't understand this, and it's because you're not taught it. So I asked them directly, okay, what do you wish they taught you in residency about all this? And see these little word balloons? It's because this is literally what they emailed back to me. So one of them said this: it would be helpful to have an understanding of this from start to finish. And I'm not going to read. I love this analogy, but it basically was, look, we're taught the medicine, which is the meat of the sandwich, but we're not taught about the front desk and the insurance pieces and what an HMO is and how Medicaid is actually different. And we're not taught about HR and accounting. Those are the bread and the mayo. I love that. And the mayo and stuff that surround the meat of the sandwich. In residency, you only learn the medicine. And this is really important, because even if you go work for an academic center where you are wholly an employee and there aren't many decisions for you to make, you still have to understand the business to understand how and why they value you and what you bring to the table, which we're going to talk about. Okay. One of these physicians, in addition to owning her practice, also worked part-time in a hospital, and she was able to contrast this. She said, I also still work in a hospital where the business is run by business people far away from the patients. In independent practice, we are the only ones who are nearly as close to the business as we are to the patients. And in a way, we have great privilege in the way we stay close to both. And I thought that was incredibly insightful, and that's something I want you to think about. Well, what else did they tell me? These are important elements, all right? I would have liked more info on being financially savvy, and this would apply to all residents, not just those interested in being practice owners. This is key. Look at what I highlighted. I would like to have been taught how to live below my means, to avoid debt, to invest early and often, to have disability and life insurance, to how to avoid the financial sharks who are out there to prey on doctors. Oh, I've worked for so long in this business, and I can think of a dozen examples of each one of those elements there of where practices or physicians didn't understand what they needed to do because no one was there to guide them. So I'm just here to at least fire up a flare and let you know these are things you need to worry about. And they're easily managed, but you have to do something about it. Also, it would be great to understand what you should be thinking about in terms of the way that patients interact with your practice, like how you can improve the patient and provider experience, the importance of recalls and well checks, managing social media. That one right there, those last two, the importance of well checks and recall and social media, those are things that residency programs never think of. I would love to learn that I'm totally wrong, and that in Ohio, the residency programs do teach you about social media, and they do teach you about the importance of recall and well checks. I would love to be proven wrong, but as a rule, they don't. And the day you come out of your residency program, you are going to bump into both of those items if you're practicing any kind of ambulatory pediatrics, at least. Here's another example. This is from I'm going back and forth between these physicians. I think learning people skills would have been helpful. Something about conflict resolution would have been helpful. I think introducing the concept of benchmarks, which we're going to look at in a little bit, would be good. Show the residents how they compare to the average. And then this comment right here. Of course, I received zero or more info. I needed more info on coding. I received zero education on this. And I will tell you, as someone in this business, every physician I speak to says, I wish I'd had more coding training. Coding is not scary. Coding is not rocket science. It's actually easily managed. It doesn't even approach the top 10 most difficult things you've had to learn in your career so far. It's not even close, but it does approach, it's very much in the top 10 things that will affect you if you are seeing patients. Whether you're employed or you own your own business, if you don't understand coding, it's going to cost someone. And that means in the end, it's going to cost you. So we'll talk about that a little bit. All right. So where do I start? Hopefully, not hopefully, but I've triggered a little bit of anxiety for a couple of you anyway. And that's not my intent. But because what I'm going to do is now give you some guidance about how to address that anxiety. It's very possible to manage. And so let's start at the beginning. I'm going to give you two references that are I've never seen in any residency program. And hopefully they'll be helpful to you. All right. So the first one is this one here, Drive by Daniel Pink. This is a wonderful book. I reference it all the time. There's a great summary by this guy, Tyler DeVries. I don't know who he is, but he writes great book summaries. And I really like this one. And Drive is about understanding human psychology and the forces of motivation in the 21st century. And one of the things I've learned is that a lot of physicians don't take the time and more importantly, don't have the time to slow down and ask themselves why they're doing what they're doing. And in fact, that question gets asked often at the beginning of your career, like, okay, what do I want to do? I want to be a pediatrician. So you are forced to put your head down and work your butt off to be a pediatrician for years. You have to learn all the medicine. You end up in your career, you do all your work. And only when you start to feel burned out do you ask that question again. And that is one of the big fundamental mistakes that plague physicians. And it's not your fault. No one guides you on this. And I strongly recommend reading this book. I mean, it's been all over, podcasts and NPR, and this Daniel Pink does a zillion TED Talks. He's really great. But read that the end of that last sentence there. When people are given autonomy, purpose, and mastery, are they motivated to work? Okay, and these three words are going to come up as we go through this. And one of the things I'm going to suggest, I'm going to get to it in a little bit. We're going to talk about your mission and your vision and your values, believe it or not, which is a little hokey, I used to think, but now I'm convinced it's much more important. I would strongly suggest that you as residents take a look at this, and I want you to apply the filter of autonomy, mastery, and purpose to your future, because it will actually make you conscious of some of the choices that you have to make coming up. But the AAP has actually helped with this a lot. This is some AAP content. You can see the link at the top right there. They have this really sincerely great chart that walks you through the sort of 5 broad categories of employment, presuming you're working as a physician, after residency. And on the far left, we have you hop out of residency and start a solo practice, which again, happens all the time. Don't listen to people who say you can't do it. We have solo practice all the way at one side, and we have working for an academic health center all the way on the right side. And what they've done is they didn't label the rows, but you can see how they work. They've compared each of these pathways, explaining the pros and cons and the balance and the trade-offs that you get for each of these environments. So just take the top row. Okay, if you work for an academic health center, you don't have much autonomy as a physician. Note the AAP's word choice, autonomy. Okay, if you work in a solo practice, you have more individual freedom. You have the most autonomy. You can wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to do X, and you are allowed to do it as long as it's legal. You're allowed to do it. Whereas if you're owned by a hospital or health system, you don't have as much ability to do that. You have to work within the context of their framework. It's very straightforward. Now, pick any one of these rows. They're really interesting. I'm picking one at random. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th one down. So in the solo practice, among the things that you have to address are the extremes of financial return. Okay. In a solo practice, the highest paid physicians I know are in solo practice or are solo owners of practices, by far. And the lowest paid physicians I work with are the ones in solo practice. Whereas if you go over to all the way to the right, in an academic health center, you're just, you have centralized record keeping. These are, by the way, these are clearly like sort of clinical benefit, or pardon me, administrative benefits of working there. Take the bottom row. Okay, if you're in solo practice, you get to determine the benefit structure. You get to determine whether you're paying for insurance or a 401k, whereas everyone else probably has an established one, and there are pros and cons to each of those. And you can see there's access to capital, and there's access to technology, and there's business risk, and it's a trade-off. And this chart, this template right here, pardon me, this table right here is a really great place to start as you think about what you might be doing in the future. And I realize some of you may be about to escape your residency soon, and you're already locked in somewhere. But others of you are earlier and don't know what you're going to be doing yet. And so where you are in your residency may also affect how you think about some of these things. So there's a nice AAP piece of content for you. Now, the AAP does something else, which I have taught this subject more than anything else. So historically, over the last 30 years, I have taught thousands, and probably at this point, tens of thousands of pediatricians on issues like how to set your pricing, or here are the E&M distribution benchmarks of pediatricians, or here is the ratio of sick to well visits relative to, COVID vaccination or whatever. I do a lot of data-driven reports, and I feel very comfortable in that space, as do you very likely. Your physicians, your scientists, you like data. And for years, I didn't put much value in any of the discussions relating to softer topics, like, for example, right here, coming up with a mission and vision and value statement for practices. I didn't think it was that important. But then, having consulted over and over and over again with practices where I'd go into a practice, an office, and there'd be 8 physicians, and they'd be arguing about how they should get paid, or should they open a second office, or should they fire their office manager, and I'd listen to them, and I'd work with them, and I'd ask myself, why are these doctors partners? Why are they even practicing together? They have totally different worldviews of how, or of what they're trying to accomplish. These folks want to expand. These folks do not. These doctors here want to be incredibly technically advanced. These doctors do not. There's a long list of things that might differentiate you, but they wanted to approach owning their businesses very differently. And what I learned was, before I do any real consulting for a practice, unless it's something very quick and technical, I actually have to make sure that they are all on the same page. And the only way to do that, I've learned, is to actually go through the process of creating value statements, a vision, and a mission. I like to do it in reverse order. That's me. And the AAP has some of these for pediatric practices. But here's my statement to you as residents. Obviously, you're not going to waltz out of residency and create a value statement for the academic center that you just decided to work for, okay, or that you opted to work for. However, I believe deeply that and I'm going to show you some examples of this in a few minutes. But I believe deeply that before you exit residency, and then periodically after residency, you should review your own personal values and vision and mission. I think this is vital to the success, your career. The happiest pediatricians I know are happy because they know what they want and they're working to achieve it, which is something that you have more than almost anybody until you get through residency. All right, or at least through residency, you've known what you've wanted and you've been working hard to do it. And when you get out of residency, if you don't actually know exactly what you want, your satisfaction and your drive, there's the purpose part I'm talking about, is going to suffer. This is what contributes to burnout. This is what contributes to dissatisfaction with your career. And there are many, I don't have to, there's no one particular source I would direct you to in this regard. I'll give you an example of one, but you can Google. There are thousands and thousands of places online where you can get a sense of how you create your own understanding of what you want out of your career. I know a lot of practices who use something called Traction. It's by EOS, which is like Entrepreneurial Operating Systems. And Traction is a book that's designed to help you run a business. But early on in the Traction process, they have a guide for how to set a personal vision and mission, and for your business as well. I, believe it or not, strongly recommend that you sit down and ask yourself what makes you special and what makes you get out of bed in the morning. What are your values? What's important to you? I am very much skipping the surface on this one. This is a 60 to 90 minute discussion. At least consider, please, when you're going to get some examples here in a few minutes, but consider, please, in your post-residency view of your career, saying out loud and consciously articulating the things that are important to you. I'm going to give you some examples of that in a little bit, but the AAP has some good content here. Now, one thing to remember, the AAP also offers a fairly constant set of career fairs. You are all going to see this probably in a week or so in April. We'll take a look. May 17th and May 18th, the AAP has a career fair. And if you're looking for a job, I will tell you right now, pediatric practices around the country are dying to get residents. Okay, they would love to get residents. You are very valuable to them and you're hard to find. Of course, you are coming out of school with a lot of debt, and a lot of practices might not be able to afford paying you, or they might offer you numbers that are below some of the craziness that you hear. It's another story. We're going to get to that a little bit. But I assure you, if you're a pediatrician, you can move to almost any town in the country, certainly most of them, and get a job within a week. All right. And the AP is there to help you. So let's move into this. Now, one of the things, and this is where I don't know if you saw at the beginning of my slide deck, I mentioned that I stole some slides from someone, a guy named Paul Vincieri. And this is where his slides come into play. What you should get from this, the reason I point it out, is Paul Vincieri is also a consultant in this business who's worked with hundreds and hundreds of practices. And he, in his remarks to residents, came up with this graphic and a few others, which totally parallel the message that I'm trying to give you. So you have two completely separate consultants in this business. I'm up in Vermont and he's in Texas, and he's managed huge practices. And I haven't done that. I worked with a bunch of small ones, and we have very different perspectives, yet we come here with very similar answers. And what he starts with is, hey, before you exit residency, and actually with some routine afterwards, you should sit down and analyze what your professional goals are, because you have competing goals and you have goals that need to be balanced against each other. And they can include everything like, look at his word at the top, your autonomy, your control, the quality of the care you give your patients, that your control over time, your control over your security and stability, the practice setting, and your personal development. Right? These elements make up what your ideal employment situation is. And if you can articulate what you want here, it's much easier for you to land in the right place. So what else does he talk about? In addition to your personal goals, when it comes to in addition to your professional goals, when it comes to your personal goals, especially because many of you are in the family starting continuing phase, all right, depending on where you are, you often have a lot of considerations, such as how much recreation time you're going to be able to get with this new job. That is time away from the job, whether it's recreation or not. What's the proximity to other family members? What's going on with your spouse's career? What the quality of the schools are locally to you? Because if you're raising a family, that comes in. These are all things you need to say out loud. And every choice you make, whether you're in the solo practice column or the academic center practice at the column or group practice column, it doesn't matter. Pardon me, each one of these is affected by that choice. Now, one of the options is to work in independent practice. That means being a solo, or it means working in a group practice. And in fact, I've asked physicians, pediatricians rather specifically, why are you an independent pediatrician? I've done these surveys. I've done these interviews, and I could fit 10 or 15 pages of great quotes about this that are really meaningful, and they include things like the ability to make decisions, change processes, and do what is necessary to take care of my patients and their families in the best way possible. Or autonomy, pure and simple. No one cares more about me and my practice than my patients than I do. Another physician says, I'm an independent pediatrician because I have quality care and financial stability. Or I'm skeptical that the nitty-gritty of running a pediatric practice can be managed from the top down by people who have no idea how to provide medical care to a child. I think those are very, very compelling reasons to work in independent practice. All right. And when I asked them, these pediatricians, literally hundreds of them, how do you define your success as an independent pediatrician? This is what they say. I define success as being able to achieve a good work-life balance, being able to choose my own location, hours, practice style, and philosophy have all been part of achieving this. Having the time to care for my own children has been a huge help in making me a better pediatrician. I think that was a lovely sentiment. Getting referrals from my own patients, school teachers of your children, or however all the doctors in town bring their children to me. Managing a business that cares for many children, including underserved children who have regular, easy access to the medical home. And there's one more, and then I want you to, I want to tie this back to something I said. We're able to hire people essential to the medical home concept who in a larger business entity would likely be terminated. Half my team would be terminated. That would not be good for children and families. Now, why are these sentences important? Remember when I said rewind and when I said, hey, you should consider your values when trying to arrange your or direct your career. Look at how the people here have identified their values. So, for example, if it is important to you to work with with underserved children, which is a very laudable value, then you are going to have to look at whether or how, for example, being an independent practice gives you the control and ability to do that, and weigh that against working for a larger entity who may subsidize that work, allowing it to happen financially, because the control of choosing to work with underserved children is very easy when you're in independent practice. It just is financially challenging. If you're working for someone else and you can't control working for underserved children, you lose your autonomy there, but the financial impact won't necessarily be on you. And this is why I encourage people to try to articulate what their position is on things. Now, let's talk about some of the options. One of the most common things that a lot of physicians, pediatricians coming out of residency want to consider is to join an existing practice. Well, let me tell you about what that means. All right, this is where I really know what I'm talking about, I think, anyway. And I want to guide you about how an existing practice views you. Now, I want to be clear. I'm going to talk about this all through the lens of your classic private pediatric practice, okay? 8 doctors, 4 doctors, 3 doctors, 10 doctors. It doesn't matter. It could be 25 doctors in 3 locations. That's the lens I'm using. But everything I'm about to say is also true of any hospital or health system owned practice. It's also true from a FQHC practice, and in its own way, it's also true of an academic health center. But let's consider a couple things. First and foremost, we must accept the fact that a pediatric practice is really a small business and must run on sound, generally accepted business principles to remain viable. This is arguably the most important slide of this entire presentation. The thing that people forget, including those who own these businesses, actually, the hospitals don't forget this, but everyone else forgets that a pediatric practice, no matter how small, no matter how big, is a business. and it has to be a business. Now, I know you are dedicated to taking care of children's lives, but you can't do that if you can't pay rent, and you can't do that if you can't pay someone to be at your front desk. And so you have to run as a small business. This is vital. And so even if you don't want to run that business, even if you don't want to have anything to do with that, you need to understand what the business thinks about you, because you are the most expensive part of that business by far. So, question number one to ask yourself as you enter the market, or as you interview with practices, or as you think about where you might want to live and maybe you can find a practice in that town. The first question to ask yourself, take your pediatric hat off and put your business owner hat on. Why would this other organization want to add me? Why do they want me? So at the top, it's the most obvious reason. We have patient demand. We have too much patient demand. We're a 4-doctor practice. We have 8,000 patients. That's too many. I can't see them all. It affects our quality, it affects our burnout. I need to hire another doctor in order to see my patient, meet my patient demand. That's a great reason. If we just go in clockwise order, we want to expand the number of people who take call. That's a huge one. We're a 2-doctor practice. If we add a third, I just cut my time on call in half. All right, or by a third. Sorry. And so we can go to succession planning. This is gigantic in 2023. This is huge. So many practices are struggling, in part because residency programs like to turn out employees. They're struggling to find business owners among their employed physicians to whom they can pass the business. So instead, they're getting bought up by private equity firms or by hospitals, and that's dangerous. Maybe they want to expand into new locations. Maybe they want to offer more services in an existing space. Maybe they want to share overhead costs. Maybe they're like, hey, we have 12 exam rooms and we only have 2 doctors or 3 doctors. We'd like to add someone to help share the costs. So the question you need to ask yourself is, when someone is offering you a job, why? And it's not simply because, it's very rarely simply because they want to see more patients. But sometimes it is, but often you are performing for them a very certain role, and you want to get a sense of what is that role? What is expected of me, because you don't want to be surprised by it. Okay. All right. So once they hire you, and this is something that so many people don't spend time to think about. Once they hire you, they have to feed you somehow. They have to give you patients. Now, occasionally, rarely, it's actually very rare, can they add a physician to a practice and you suddenly have a full panel. It only really happens, frankly, when a practice loses a physician very quickly. They move or get abducted by aliens, whatever the case may be. You have a 10-doctor practice, you have a doctor with a full panel of 1,200 patients, and they're gone overnight. You can kind of plug someone in there, but it doesn't usually happen that way. Okay. Usually what happens is a physician, like a 5-physician practice, pardon me, might have 6,000 patients normally. Okay. Just give or take. And they've grown and they've gotten to 8,000 patients, and they're too busy. They're seeing too many kids each day, or they're not keeping up with their well visits. They're not keeping up with their immunizations, because that happens. And adding a doctor allows them to, lower the pressure on their schedules. However, very often they feel that pressure far before they have enough volume to add a full-time doctor. All right. It's not like a solo doctor has twice the average volume before they add someone. They start feeling the pressure when they have about 20% too much volume. So what are they going to do when they add you to the practice? Are they going to all shift patients from their existing panels to you? Are they going to work with you to develop a niche? Maybe you're in the good old days, it used to be, oh, you're a female pediatrician showing up with an all-male practice. Well, now it's the other way around. So maybe this 5-woman practice is hiring you as a man, because now the teenage boys have someone they're willing to see. Awesome, leverage it. And it's the other way around, leverage it. Maybe you're a breastfeeding expert. Maybe you're an expert on ADD. I don't know but are they going to help you develop a niche? What are their marketing efforts going to be? How are they going to promote you? How are they going to make sure your schedule is filled? Maybe they stopped taking new patients and now they're taking them again and they can all flow to you. These are questions you need to ask yourself. How are they feeding me? All right. And here's why. Here are numbers from the AMGA salary survey based on in 2013. And this is where a lot of residents start to panic. I want you to look at the median line. The median line shows, on average, how many visits a median level pediatrician saw according to their data on an annual basis. So if that means, okay, the median pediatrician saw 4,001 patients in a year. And if that physician works 200 days a year, 200 days being 50 weeks at 4 days a week, all right, 2 weeks of vacation, and you actually usually have quite a bit more than that with holidays, all right, you would be seeing 20 kids a day. If you work 175 days, which is in fact much more likely, do your math. Maybe you're working 3.5 clinical days. Maybe you get 2 weeks of vacation, but there's also 4th of July and New Year's Eve and everything like that. So maybe you're actually working closer to 175 days a year. Now you're at 22.9 or 23 patients a day. And when I give this course, of course, to the residents, I say, how many patients do you see in a day? And they're like, 8, 12. Well, this is what the real world looks like right here. And you'll notice, go to that right column, and because there are plenty of pediatricians who only actually work 150 days a year. And by work, I mean see patients. They do other work on other days. You're talking a range of 20 to 40 kids a day. Now, just as an aside, pre-COVID, I have much more accurate data for pediatricians than what's here, okay? I believe. And the numbers are just pre-COVID are lower. Absolutely. I would say that the median pediatrician, or let's use the mean pediatrician, the average, the top row. The average pediatrician in 2019 was probably closer to 3,500 visits a year, 32 to 3,500 visits a year. And they were closer to 17 visits a day. Now, for a lot of residents, of course, 17 visits a day is 50% more than they do right now, or 100% more than they do right now. But 17 to 20 patients was much more realistic. That was pre-COVID. However, during COVID, the roller coaster of patient demand meant that I know practices who had no patients some days, and that's really challenging on your cash flow. But they might, they dipped to, where they normally used to see 20. Now they're seeing, they were seeing like 3 or 5, depending on where we were in the COVID phase. But also on at least twice already, and 3 times at this point, in each of the falls of 2020, 21, and 22, the demand for visits because of kids going back to school, needing COVID tests, needing COVID shots and everything like that, the sick visit demand pediatricians have had far, far exceeds these numbers. So even though I'm saying broadly, the norm right now is lower because of COVID, these numbers have been higher. And so I want you to ask yourself, all right, are you prepared when you leave residency to start seeing 20 to 25 kids a day? Because that's what it takes. And why is it that's what it takes? I'll show you why. Because every business, whether it's the academic health center or the solo pediatrician, it's a math. This is the math problem they have to face. They bring in $1. They get that someone does work at the practice, and the $1 comes in from Blue Cross or United or from Medicaid, doesn't matter who it's from, the $1 comes in, and right away, a pediatrician in a typical practice spends 60 cents of that $1 before even getting to you. Why? Because they have vaccines, and they have front desk staff, and they have back office staff, and they have EHRs, and they have rent. I mean, those are the big ticket items. And there are hundreds of other things that all have to do with owning a business. And when they spend 60, 65% on their overhead, the money they have left needs to be their profit, because they need a profit in order to run a successful business. And you. So you are actually competing for a smaller and smaller piece of the pie based on the profitability or the overhead of the work that needs to be done. And so it looks like this. Now, during the AAP Section H last year, Section H, for those of you who don't know, is well, in this instance, it's the AAP's practice management section does an all-day set of webinars like this or in-person presentations like this. And I presented with a physician from Georgia. She owns her practice and has a couple clinicians who work for her. She walked people through how to do clinician compensation. And I guarantee you that every potential employer has a spreadsheet that looks like this. And this is how it works. You can actually go to that site. It's a Google Doc, make a copy of it, and you can actually play with this data for yourself. And this is how it works. Take a look at row 8, or the one that's labeled E, okay? Let's say when you get out of residency, your desired salary is $100,000. It's more than that, but let's just say it is. So if we plug in $100,000 for desired salary, and we assume that your benefits and taxes, which we'll talk about in a little bit, will add to the employer a cost of additional cost of about 20% of your salary. So that gives you $20,000 of benefits, which is, largely health insurance, but it's everything else. And that means, so if you want $100,000, your owner is going to have to spend about 120. That's pretty normal. That's a rule of thumb that we all use. Well, look at the element up top. Well, if the practice generates on average about $140 a visit, and you work 144 days a year, and the practice overhead is 65%, and they'd like a margin in order to, manage the roof caving in, or to actually even just get a profit that they can earn. If those are set at 65% and 10% respectively, we know that the required revenue for this is $480,000. And in order to get to $480,000, we divide that by the average dollars per visit. That means you need to do 3,429 visits. And if you're working 144 days a year, that's 24 visits a day. This is not hard math. This is pre-algebra math. And this tool allows you to actually change any of those numbers in red. They're not calculated. They are variables you can change. So you can say, well, I'd like $185,000. And I'm talking with a practice that generates about $175 a visit, and I'm willing to work 4 days a week. Now what? And you can plug your numbers in and see how close you are to your expectations. The fact of the matter is, if you feel like you need to make $200,000 a year right out of residency, you are going to be told by someone, you need to see 34 kids a day, or whatever the number works out to be. And you may not need to see that volume at a place like an FQHC or in a hospital setting, but then you can be guaranteed that they are subsidizing you, and the hospital is paying you more than you generate for them. So that's something you need to keep an eye on, because that affects your own employment viability. All right. Now, just as an aside, when I talk about compensation, it's over here, the total compensation, there are things you need to know. It includes your salary, which varies regionally. It's based on supply and demand, hopefully includes future increases, and can include bonuses such as a sign-on bonus, a retention bonus, a productivity bonus, or a quality bonus. Those are all things you can ask for. Those are all things that a lot of practices are happy to pay if they can lock you in, because they need your help, okay? You have all sorts of options with your salaries. You have issues relating to vacation. You have deferred payments. These are all things that come up in the negotiations with a practice. You should be prepared to understand, well, am I okay working in this model versus that model, and so forth. And another thing to ask yourself is, are they offering partnership? And do you want partnership? Partnership doesn't simply mean you make more money. It also means you're responsible for things. So then one thing that we run into that, you'll see here that this is something, again, I shamelessly stole from Paul Venturi. If you are joining a group practice and there's an option or opportunity in the future for you to become a partner in that practice, Paul has a great piece, a great document on the most common issues overlooked in shareholder agreements. And they include things here. These are all things you want to ask for. What are my obligations when I work here? Are they exclusive? Am I allowed to work somewhere else? Am I allowed to do ER coverage? Am I allowed to be a medical director for somewhere while I'm working for the practice? And you're going to want to learn about other terms and obligations, about call and coverage, and the corporation's rules and regulations. The number of practices that I've consulted for who had just an absolutely horrendous partnership agreement is, unfortunately, that list is too long. And this is the time to fix it, or make sure your employment option is not broken, is before you sign it the first time. Questions that you need to ask especially if you're becoming employed, or if you want to become employed, or whether you're in an academic center or in a small practice, you want to ask about sick and vacation time and what the rules are for rolling it over or using it or losing it. What about vacation? Who covers continuing education? Who pays for journals, books, and hospital dues, and state dues, and AAP dues, and specialty organizations? Is there a retirement plan? And then how does this group deal with telephones, pagers? Some people still use them, auto gas, and moving expenses. These are all fair things to ask about. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, it's perfectly normal and reasonable, you should expect to get moving expenses covered. I can't say that. But it's worth asking for. And for the right practice, it might absolutely be worth it. So don't miss out on that. Now, one more option is perhaps like Zach Galifianakis in Hangover, you are a one-person wolf pack. Well, if you want to go start your own practice, all right, you do have to have a little bit of a reality check. You are going to have more debt than you've ever had in your life. Most of the debt is unsecured. Bankruptcy isn't going to take care of your student loans. And your ability to pay it back is going to be the most important part to the lenders. But I'm going to also add, actually, I'm going to add this. What makes you special? Now, this is actually phrased in a fairly pejorative way. Well, what makes you so special? Why should someone come to you? What can you do better? This is stolen shamelessly from Paul, why is there only one story of David and Goliath in the Bible, or why aren't there 10? Because it's challenging, and it's not every solo practice that stays open. And when it asks those two questions in the middle, why come to you, and to the right, what makes you so special, and what do you do better? That's where your personal vision, mission, and values come into play, because you need to be able to articulate. And I skip by this slide here. If you are going to go out into private practice, whether you open one or not, there are some pros and cons to being in a group versus being solo. You probably have more financial stability in a group, not always, but often. You have an established patient base. You have strength in numbers, which means you're sharing call and you're sharing management of the business, and you have built-in resources. You have people who you employ to keep things going. Whereas in a solo practice, you are probably going to have better satisfaction. You often have better quality of care, often, not always, and you have total control over the practice. Now, this horrible graphic, I don't like it. I need to redo it, so forgive me. But years ago, as part of Independent Pediatrician magazine, as part of our interview process of independent pediatricians, we asked this specific question. On a scale of 1 to 5, can you tell us how your work-life balance is going? Give us a 1 if you're totally overworked and you're miserable, and give us a 5 if you have perfectly balanced work life. If your work-life balance is perfect. And then what we did is we asked them that question, and then we broke them down into segments, because I had a guess, and I guessed wrong. I had a guess that physicians with young children at home, school-age children, which are largely women, would feel less work-life balance, because that's an incredibly challenging thing to do. And so if we take a look all the way to the left, the overall average, putting it right in the middle, is a 3.39. And yes, men feel slightly better balanced with a 3.59 to 3.21 than women. But what we see here from a work-life balance is that it seems to peak, in fact, in the 3 to 7 doctor range for whatever reason, and it is low when you're a solo doctor. However, the big ticket items go all the way over to the right, and call, which is where you see call 0 days, call 1 to 5 nights, call 6 to 30 nights, and so forth. The less call you have, the more balanced your work-life arrangement feels. If you go all the way to the right, the thing I think with the lowest score was that for the physicians who do call 3 to 7 times a week, or they have evening hours plus call, 3 to 7 times a week, do not feel that balance. When they're on call 6 to 30 nights a month, they have a super low balance. But when they have no call, they feel they have the best life balance. And so this is something for you to be prepared for, taking call. Back in 2016, the AAP interviewed 2 geniuses, well, one genius and me, about a presentation that we've done for years about how to open a practice in 5 easy steps. You can read about it there, which also gets you links to the recordings, which you can find online as well. These are elements of opening a practice that you need to think about. Everything from money to patient billing, to advisors, to time, to office space. These are all debates you need to have, but there are professionals like my colleague in this article who have helped, literally hundreds of pediatric practices open. It's not rocket science. It's just hard work and organization. One thing we noticed, and this has become incredibly visually apparent, I did a survey of new practices a couple years ago, and it's actually the demographics are even stronger now. But I did a survey of the practices who had opened, like the startups. And from about 2007, and I think I did this in 2013 or 2015, 85% of the independent practices had been opened by women, and 45% of those practices had been opened by pediatricians of color by their designation. Right now, I'm going to suggest that it's 99% of the practices that we see right now are opened by women, and it's about 50% are opened by people of color. 60% of the independent practices opened in 2007 are either rural or super urban, and they take very high Medicaid. Right? These demographics have a profound effect on the way the practices need to run. And right now, when I've given this class at the AAP NCE, I'll have a room with 200 people in it, and the demographic makeup of that room reflects this massively. When we open the doors and we go back out onto the halls, that isn't 99% female and 45 to 50% physicians of color. So this is something I want you to think about. Finally, last slide, and then I'll let you go. I hit about an hour, I think. My suggestions to you as you enter the market. Join SOPM. It's the AAP section on administration and practice management. It's about $30 a year. It's a mailing list. If you are thinking about going into private practice, even if you're working for someone else, it behooves you to be there. It's where all the discussions among the cool kids about practice management happen for pediatricians. Pardon me. You should study coding. The AAP has a coding guide. The AAP has a coding newsletter. There are so many coding opportunities for training online for free at your state chapter might be doing one right now. But I strongly recommend that you become decent at coding, understand your E&Ms, understand how to do vaccine admins. There aren't a lot of things you need to learn. I would invest the time to understand the AAP's Bright Futures. Especially, you should Google Bright Futures periodicity schedule. It's kind of like a treasure map, and it tells you not only from a clinical and evidence-based perspective what services you should be providing every single patient at every single age, but that is also the map of the procedures that are covered by insurance. I encourage you to take an accounting class. You can actually take an accounting class in about 2 hours. I think the Lemonade Game is still out there. You can Google the Lemonade Game for that. But get a very brief understanding about what accounting looks like. It's not hard. And in fact, most of you will find it way more interesting and fun than you think, because it's simple puzzle pieces. And when you do it right, everything fits and adds up. And it helps you think about your practice from a cash flow perspective. Last but not least, get out of your office. Go visit a friend in practice. If you had friends who graduated ahead of you, who are in practice somewhere, or even working for a hospital, go on vacation and find them and go spend a day, shadow them, see what they're doing. One of the biggest problems that pediatricians exhibit is that they operate in silos from the moment they get out of residency. They no longer have a team. They have friends and they have colleagues, but they don't actually explore and listen to what their colleagues have to say. And so I'm just going to tell you, get out of your office. All right, so there you have it, residents. I hope that was meaningful for at least one of you and hopefully all of you, but I'd love it if I just got through to one or two people. You are perfectly welcome to email me, chip@pcc.com, anytime if you have any questions. And if I can't answer them, I will help you figure out who can. I hope you listen a little bit to my suggestions about articulating your values and your vision and using some of these AAP resources to get better at what you want to do. Thank you. And I hope to see you soon. Bye.